Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we want to continue talking about Synology and their 2023 series of devices. Myself, Robbie, and Eddie, the web guy, I think is in that direction here on camera. We already did a video about this about 3-4 months ago when we were sort of looking at the transition between the 22 and the 23 series in Synology hardware and software. Normally, we wouldn't do another video like this for almost another year, but there's been such an influx of information in the last few months that we thought we need to kind of bolt this on to that video. So this is kind of like an addendum, and we're not going to talk a lot about some of the stuff that was in there to do with cameras and hard drives and some of the stuff there. We've tried to focus predominantly on the updated information, so this should be a shorter video, hopefully, fingers crossed, but on top of that it will mostly be 89% pure new information since that other video there. So Eddie, how are you feeling currently about the Synology 2023 series of hardware? What's the vibe you're getting?
I'm going very excited. This time I can actually feel it coming, because all of these traces on the internet and everything what we have access to, the information, it's confirming that actually these new models are finally coming out. Everyone were waiting for 22 series so badly, like 922 plus, and it never came. But this time 93 is there's enough evidence that it's actually coming, and it's coming very soon.
But, you know, before we get to that, let's build up to that one, simply because let's go with something that we've got a little bit more solid information on at the moment. Now, one of the ranges that is unbelievably overdue for an update, a refresh, call it what you will, of course, is the Value series. And we are talking about the DS223, the DS423, and the DS223J. We have had something of an update on that. Eddie, over to you.
Yes, we can see that the new CPU was going to come out is going to be the next model up for RTD. I think it was 12.
It's 1619B. I always remember it because of the name of that QNAP Rackmount. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
It's also a Realtek CPU. It's very similar in what it can do in capabilities. It still can handle 4K in 60 hertz, 60 frames per second. The base frequency is slightly smaller, like lower, but it should still be able to handle 4K. So we're going to see these probably, this CPU is going to be seen across all Value series and J series. So we can expect maybe even DS118 to be replaced. No evidence yet, but this is where we can see the CPU.
But even looking at my notes here, I mean, the RTD 1619, I've been looking into it more and more. And again, it's worth highlighting the way we came across this information was Synology's own download section where they post updates. And it became very, very apparent that there was a CPU, the RTD 1219B, being listed along with applications for Video Station, even snapshots and stuff like that. And some of the key applications too, having a version that was compatible with architecture with this CPU there. And this is a CPU that's never featured on any other Synology to my mind. So therefore, it seems to be a logical jump that we can say that we're 99.9% certain this is the CPU for the Value series. What Eddie was saying there with regard to the architecture, luckily I've got all kind of notes. I've told you, get it off the top of your head. I'm just going to read a bit of paper, mate. It is a 6-core ARM V8, so it's a 64-bit ARM-based processor there with a 1.3 gigahertz clock speed per core. One thing that's interesting is the memory on this CPU goes as high as 4 gig. Now, when we've looked at the previous series of Value solutions in Synology's DiskStation range, they've never really exceeded higher than 1 gig of 2 gig of memory. They've always kind of gone same CPU across a bunch of the devices and then partition off the memory. 512, 1 gig and 2 gigs spread across the different devices. Whether they'll take advantage of the full 4 gig, who's to say? Very rarely do they use upgradable kind of SODIMM modules there. It's normally soldered straight to the board there. But apart from that, as Eddie says, the support of 4K and support of H.265 on this CPU is very much equal to that of the Realtek. It's a very natural progression upgrade from the previous generation CPU. I mean, again, how do you feel about that? I know you were always a big fan of the Value series NASs, Ed, and you were one of the first people I knew that bought the 118. How do you feel about this processor?
I feel all right, because like you mentioned about the limit for memory. So there is a chance now for them to upgrade up to 4 gigabytes. And I think this is what exactly they're going to do, because Plex is becoming more demanding. And this is the most popular app people use on their multimedia NASs. So this is going to be a really cheap way to set up their home multimedia center. So they will have their either dual bay or single bay Poly series NAS with, let's say, even 3 or 4 gigabytes of RAM, and Plex will just run beautifully on it. And it's going to be energy efficient and quiet.
I mean, frankly, I think we can all kind of read the room a little bit with Synology. They've taken their foot ever so slightly off the gas when it comes to multimedia. There was an update recently for Video Station with regards to a particular support codec and file format. So whether they would go for this CPU with graphics in the front of their brain, I'm not so sure, but it's certainly a more capable processor. Plus a 6-core ARM is still going to, when it's coming to the more demanding first-party applications like Surveillance Station and stuff like that, that they still want to run on these Value Series devices, this is actually a very interesting and, I would say appropriate move for the Value Series moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. And having extra 2 cores instead of quad-core 6 cores, you can actually have simultaneous streams happening at the same time. Because before, you had to wait in a queue to transcode or something like that to spread across all this performance available. So now they can do actually more streams simultaneously with this new CPU.
Moving forward, we can talk about another series from Synology that, in its own way has had large gaps between releases. We can talk about that brand new router. We talked about it earlier in the week, I think a couple of days ago at the time of recording right now. Ignore that clock, it's super wrong. This is, of course, the RT3000AX, a dual-band Wi-Fi 6 2.5 gigabit Ethernet router that was revealed to us. There should be a link to the article in the description there. The amount of information we have about it before I go any further, I will think it's worth highlighting there's an element of contention between myself and Eddie with regards to a model ID that was linked to this device. Eddie, over to you.
Yeah, that's been very confusing because on those leaks, those documents, those guides they put on these websites, they mention it as WRX500 series or 5000 series. But when you go into those pictures and actually zoom in, you can see this RT3000 series. So there is a confusion. Is it actually going to be RT, or they're going to masking something, or what's going on? I have a feeling that they might be actually this WRX coming out as some sort of like extender, like a mesh point, but which is not having any router capabilities. Well, it could be just my guess, or could be masking up, but that's my feeling. I think there will be 2 new routers coming actually.
See, for me, I look at it and I think that Synology being ever so slightly, trying to be secretive about a lot of their releases. They've got a good history for that kind of stuff. And again, some products do trade under different names, and some of them, like the DS1823xs and devices like that, or the RS1220, very train spotter here today, very inside baseball, but it's they do change names in development. So I personally think those 2 model IDs are the same router, but I was wrong. We've already been proven wrong in the previous predictions video of a couple of things. I think you rightly called that Value Series CPU. So again, I'm genuinely looking forward to seeing if I'm right or wrong on this, and I kind of hope I'm wrong, if I'm honest with you. But a little bit
because that would be really. Yeah,
go ahead.
Because that would be great if they did actually release something super cheap, some similar like Google mesh points. That each mesh point could cost like around £50, and you don't need any advanced functionality on this router. All it needs to do is create this mesh network. That's all, and just keep it cheap, because that's the mistake they had done, experienced before, that they create their products too expensive for the market. Yes, they are really good, but they're too expensive. So if they could create something really cheap and then simple, then that could be a trick.
I mean, I agree with you. As good as that product is, and again, that software that comes with that is just insane. Even in safe access on its own is an absolute winner of a system there. There's still no avoiding it that the clout and the reputation they have in NAS has not translated as well into the world of routers with companies, look at Asus and Netgear and these companies that just dominate that area. And I just feel like Synology may have gone in a little bit too high there before making a name for themselves and stretching their elbows. But yeah, before we wrap up on the router, we still don't know the CPU. It's almost certainly going to be a Qualcomm SoC inside. I reckon it will be the same processor as the 6600, if I'm honest, maybe with less memory inside. I think that device has a couple of gig of DDR3 low power memory inside. I mentioned that 2.5 GBE port on it. It is Wi-Fi 6. I'm willing to bet it's going to be 5.9 gigahertz enabled as well, because Synology must have put a lot of time and money into enabling that frequency and that band channel for the 6600. But another thing that I find very intriguing, and I say intriguing, let's call a spade, disappointing, is that single 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port. If you look at the discourse that has followed the reveal, unofficially of course, of this router online, the general consensus is still, why only one 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port there? Because the minute you utilize it for your incoming internet connection there, everything else is at 1 GBE. So either you add that to a 2.5 G NAS, it's still annoying me they've only put one port on there. Yes, they've got failover. Yes, they've got all of the software attributes. And I presume this is going to be a much more affordable alternative to the 6600AX. But that single 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port makes me want to smash my microphone. Which brings us to the tiniest nugget of information on the Plus series of DiskStation devices. You know what I'm talking about, the DS923, 223, 423 and 723 Plus. These are the devices that people are sitting there at the window watching the rain, waiting to arrive. They're kind of the prosumer mid-range, they're the most popular devices. They are the Adidas Classic of the range there. Now, what information have we got for everyone, Eddie?
Yeah, there's not much, but there was a day when you just searched for 922 plus and nothing comes up, and then you think like, oh, okay, let's search 923 plus, and then the Google Synology knowledge base results come up saying like, oh, there's DS923, DS723, and there's DS423 plus listed on their own website. And it's like, oh yeah, that's a confirmation. We never got that far.
I mean.
Obviously, when you click then go there, there's no more information about what CPU is going to be, what ports, anything like that. But it clearly indicates that it's coming out, and if they listed it already, it's kind of comes soon out.
I mean, Len, just to let you guys behind the curtain the tiniest bit, when it comes to a lot of our news videos, a lot of the preparation that goes into video, we use quite a large bank of different tools and services and all that kind of stuff to we crawl certain websites, we do certain things, and eventually get information on new releases for you guys. But the very idea that the information for probably one of the most popular products that we will talk about this year, and it came from the most simple, basic Google search in the world, actually infuriates me. The fact that a simple Google search of bunk, there it is on the download center, honestly, it smacks in the face sometimes. It really does. I mean, Synology have clearly been very quick to remove any content from that page. And again, I believe it's up still. You can just search and you'll find it there. But ultimately, this is really the only information we have on those new pluses. It's clearly an indication that the information we received back in July was true. Synology wouldn't have added these products to their page list there unless they are legitimate. That's on there. But still, we've still zero confirmation of CPU information. This is going to be an area, maybe skip forward a couple of minutes if you've already watched the previous video. But I just want to talk a little bit once again, like we did before, on CPUs, because the fact that we still have no idea about the CPU inside these series is quite astounding to me. I mean, for the last few years, we would have just gone, yep, it's an Intel Celeron, let's break for lunch. That's what we would have done. But unfortunately, that's not an option here, because NAS is like the 1522 and the RS422 Plus, rocked up with an R1600 embedded Ryzen. And of course, that throws into doubt, is Synology turning its back slightly on Ryzen? We've got another NAS we're going to talk about later on that's AMD based, that adds another Lego brick to the wall of Synology, slightly stepping away from Intel products. I know Intel in the last couple of years has been substantially hit by changing work patterns, resource problems, and more from the pandemic. The after effects of that pandemic and semiconductor shortages. Even Ukraine and its supply of neon going out the window has hurt everyone. And the idea that Synology would look at this value series and instead of going for a Celeron, which they've done for what feels like a million years, and opt for an embedded graphics R1000 or V1000, isn't actually that impossible anymore. There was a time I would have laughed my head off. But for you, Eddie, if you heard, say, the 923 was going to arrive with an AMD embedded Ryzen, either that 1600 dual core or an embedded Vega version, I think the 1680, I might be wrong. How would you feel about that as someone who uses a Plus series Synology?
Yeah, they surprised us actually quite heavily when they released 1522 Plus with a Ryzen CPU, AMD-based CPU, because there was no multimedia support, and everyone was thinking like, "What's going on?" You know, they're just reducing, the number of bays we can have in our multimedia center. So now what we are left with is 4-bay DS920, and if they're going to put the same CPU what they did with 1522. This AMD, then that's game over. There's only 2-bay left. Then I don't know what people are going to do, but there is a brother for this CPU with Vega driver, which is our graphics chip. And if they did put this one in a new model, then I'm fine. I'm not a fan of AMD CPUs in general. I don't trust them for like quite a lot of heating and the reliability. Yeah, I might be wrong, but I just trust.
It's that gut instinct. I think a lot of people have that with like WD and Seagate drives as well. I guess a lot. We grow up with these devices.
Because based on what QNAP did with their new models, I think Synology might still follow the route QNAP chose, and they're going to implement those four-core Celerons and dual-core Celerons for those new models.
The J6412, I believe, that CPU. I think in many ways it's a superior product to that N5000 that we've seen flying around. It's just got a better efficiency mark there with very similar graphical handling. But again, we'll have to wait and see. There's just not enough information on these devices right now in order to make a big judgment. And moving away from the Plus into something a little bit more enterprisey. Now, if you'd spoken to anyone that's either a first, second or third time Synology buyer in the last decade or so, and you asked them what their ideal business desktop NAS was, I'm pretty sure you'd hear them say two things, 8-bay and 10GBE. And these are two things that Synology have kept at arm's length from most of their user base, going, nah, well, you can have one of them. But you can't have both. You can have one, but you can't have both. And the nearest we got was the DS1823, which is the 10GBE 8-bay NAS that had a CPU that I believe could just about run Angry Birds. But now, recently, we've kind of discovered information on a new 8-bay, a DS1823xs Plus, which, again, anyone that knows much about Synology products will go, okay, that sounds interesting. There's a lot of things to unpack in that model ID. But before I go to my lovely little notes there on the side, Eddie, what do you think about the idea of the DS1823xs Plus and what that means? Even that model ID, without going into specifics yet, what does that mean to you?
I think it's a great idea because when they released 1621xs already, I was so excited. And then because it has like, and also 3622xs,
of course,
which I was thinking like, oh, that's a beast. And it was so big and so unaffordable, people just simply couldn't buy it. But it was like great multimedia NAS. And now they found this sweet middle spot between 6 and 12 bay. So now they're coming up with 8 bay option. It's probably going to still feature very same hardware what 6 bay has. And it's going to have NVMe, it's going to have 10 gigabit, it's going to have all of this stuff what you need really to crunch all those 4K media files. I'm really excited about it. And it's 8 bays, so it's got a load of storage you can put in there.
I mean, we're looking at that model ID as mentioned. So first, it's an XS series, so that's your 5-year warranty standard on there. There's obviously going to be the questions around Synology priority of hard drives and compatibility there. That's never really going to go away. But when it comes to 10GBE, there is the question of it going to be 1 or 2 ports. I don't know if they would put 2 10GBE ports on this 8-bay because I'm not 100% convinced an 8-bay could fully saturate that. It's not impossible with the right kind of media. I've been doing some tests this week with the 1522 with a 10GBE adapter and 4 22TB drives, and I was able to fully saturate a 10GBE connection there. So it's not impossible or unheard of to think that an 8-bay could fully saturate 2 10GBE ports. But I think in order to keep it within the product family, I think it's probably more likely to have just the one 10GB on there. Now, with regard to, and also a couple of LAN ports, maybe that out of bounds port as well that they're quite fond of having, and of course a PCIe upgrades a lot. But what's interesting is this idea of the CPU, and you touch on something there when you mentioned about the CPU similarities to the 6-bay. The CPU that's in the 6 bay is looking well old at this point. That CPU, I think the 1527, I might have got that wrong there, do let me know in the comments, but that is a quad-core Xeon processor inside the 6 bay, whereas the 12 bay has got a 6-core, the 1531 series, which has got, checking on my notes, 2.2 gigahertz CPU that can be burst up to 2.7, and it's whether Synology pick a CPU for this 8 bay in an XS series that's going to have a few years strapped on the end, where they go, right, we're going to go for the 6-core. And if this is a 6-core, 8 bay, 10 GBE system, sign me up, Buttercup. Absolutely. It's what people have been waiting for a long time in an 8 bay from Synology. And it's always been a very glaring hole in their portfolio, I would say, overall. But I mean, again, an 1823xs model. The information we have on this is if anything, less than any other device on this list. Which brings us to Rackstation units. You didn't think it was all going to be about DiskStation today, did you? Oh, man alive. Next up, we're going to talk about a new 12-bay Rackmount solution coming from Synology, a redundant and a non-redundant version there, the RS2423 Plus, and of course the RP Plus version there. And again, this does seem to signify a new generation of that SMB kind of small medium business solution that we've kind of got used to over the years, featuring that embedded Ryzen, that V, I believe, 15, I think it was 1400 or 1600 CPU. I haven't got that on my notes. There's only so many things you can keep in your brain, you know. But this is the first time we've seen a refresh of one of those embedded Ryzen series devices. And of course, the big question for a lot of people right now, looking at there being a potential follow-up to this and where Synology are now going to move the next 6 bay, the next 8 bay, the next 12 bay device, when they moved away from Atom originally onto the embedded Ryzen. What's the next step? Where they're going to go next? Are they going to keep within the same product family? Head back to Intel? It doesn't look that way. So, Eddie, I mean, again, we don't really have anything solid to go on here, but we can look at the architecture of these devices, and I think we've got a reasonable guess, I would say, or a prediction, if you will, on the CPU this product family is going to head towards. Over to you.
Yeah, there is mention about the RS2423 Plus. With and without redundant power supply coming out, we can expect the CPU to be 1750B, which has 4 cores and the 3.3 gigahertz clock speed, and it allows also 32 gigabytes of RAM upgrades with 3200 megahertz clock speed. So, which is kind of, it's higher clock speed than the previous version, but it's also using more power to run this thing.
And run hotter, yeah.
Ends up being hotter, yeah, exactly, thermal issues and stuff like that. But it's perfect. It's going to be perfect for virtual machines because of the size of the RAM and the clock speed per core.
And the vCPUs as well. That 4-core turning into an 8-core vCPU. It's going to be very handy.
Because normally you would expect almost some specs like this on XS series, but seeing that on Plus series, Rackmount, it's surprising. Yeah, that's going to be good.
But I mean, again, unfortunately, we don't have any real confirmation of that CPU. As I say, this is still an estimation and a prediction. But at the same time, we've seen the way Synology upgrade their products, and they will tend to stick with a chipset for a while. And this CPU does swap out quite easily into that existing architecture that the previous CPU had, that 1500B. The other thing we will highlight is, of course, there are some out there that would go, well, what about that other one, that R1600 that they've already been utilising in the 1522s and stuff, and that dual core. I don't think that's a suitable upgrade, and I don't think they will use that CPU in the next Plus series of those, again, 6, 8 bay, etc. SMB solutions there. I think this is probably the most logical CPU upgrade there. But this isn't really it. We've still got one more rack mount left to talk about.
You mean expansion unit, don't you?
Oh, sorry. No, he's absolutely right. Sorry. Whoa, look at that. Fool am I. That's right. There's also a new expansion unit, the RX1223RP, designed for this new series of Rackstation solutions there. Again, it's a JBOD. It's handled by external SAS, connected to the original box there. But again, yes, there is a new expansion device as well. And we end today's 2023 predictions and confirmations video on some powerhouse kit. We already talked about this on NAS Compares and its own video, I feel like 3, maybe even 4 weeks ago, but because it wasn't in the previous prediction video, I just wanted to make sure we covered it. And that is the new SA series refresh boxes, the SA6400 and the SA6200. These are going to arrive with EPCY AMD processors, which are ridiculous. These are the first examples of such a heavy-duty server processor making its way onto a Synology platform. Now, if for those of you that follow Synology products, you'll know that the previous generation of these devices tended to arrive with Intel Silver Xeons, which were already at that time cutting edge as heck, and that goes for the flash stations too. But this is another one of those little indications of this move towards AMD CPUs, whether that is because of a higher availability, whether it's because they've realized while experimenting with DSM and more and finding out they can eke more out of these systems with an AMD processor. Maybe it's a cost thing, who knows. But these new Rackmount SA systems, we don't really talk that much about SAs here on the channel. It's so highfalutin, hyper edge that, again, it's very hard to make a video about that without getting completely elbow deep into the text of it. But just before we wrap today's video, I just want to return to that subject we mentioned earlier on. Eddie, Intel versus AMD processors there. Imagine, if you will, a year or so from now, if Synology had completely abandoned Intel CPUs. How would you feel about that? I know we sort of talked about that before, but how would you feel if Synology just switched lanes completely away from Intel processors?
I would be disappointed. I would probably consider having 2 NASs running simultaneously. One is for multimedia, very likely from QNAP or Asus Store, and Synology, very basic models, J, so they wouldn't see my money.
Really? Wow. Didn't see that.
I would go for really basic J series NAS to run the backups, that's all, because basically with those new CPUs, that's the only thing you can do, in my opinion. Obviously you can do virtual machines, but that's not what I do. I do multimedia, I do backups like that. So if you take multimedia away, that's it. I'm buying the cheapest NAS you have out there and link it with a QNAP, which can actually do some proper fun stuff.
I mean, for me, as long as the system does what I want it to do and also it does what Synology say it will do, I think I would be okay with it. But I think it would be remiss not to at least examine that when the 1522 Plus arrived with that dual-core AMD embedded Ryzen R1000 processor, it resulted in 2 things, I think, and this is speaking to a lot of e-tailers. Number one, it was a lot of people going, what about Plex? And another bunch of people went out and bought the 920. The 1522 did a great job of selling 920s, which really surprised because a lot of people who were looking on the fence, wondering about buying a 920 or not, were going, oh, there'll be a follow-up soon. Where's that 922? And everyone waiting for it. And then, of course, eventually, when this other system arrived, it has led to a lot of discourse online of a lot of people wondering, are they all going to be with this kind of processor there? I think when the 2.3 series for the DiskStation Pluses does arrive, that's going to be a real turning point for the brand. And whether they arrive on the run up to their launch event, which they're almost certainly going to do, I've had no confirmation of it, but if they were going to do physical events, I think we would have heard about it now, invites in our e-boxes. So it's almost certainly going to be another digital event, and it will be like November, December or something like that. So if we still don't know by then the direction they're going with regards to these processors, that's going to be very, very strange, I think, for the brand. And I would like to assume at least some of these Plus series are going to arrive before that point. But this has been an update to Synology 2023 hardware. A number of you in the comment in the previous video did highlight that we didn't really talk about software. And there are things to talk about. The SM 7.1 having another micro update. Synology Photos adding features, but not that one feature that everyone still wants for thing recognition. So we will maybe look at some of that and see if there's enough that we can put into a software predictions video and confirmations video of updates. But apart from that, let's wrap things up here. Again, there's links to all of the articles and the products that we talked about today. Everything, all the information we have on them linked in below. There's also the mega article, the mega thread, if you will, that has the list of every single 2023 release that's arrived on our radar and everything we know about it linked in the description. So I recommend you check that out. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. Eddie, it's been lovely to see you over there. Look at the state of this room. I could have at least tidied it up or put a battery in that clock for you. But yeah, I hope everyone has a great weekend. Eddie, anything like anything you want to say to the subs?
Oh, we talked We covered everything, I think.
He's a man of very few words, and some of them useful, some of them not, but we'll see. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.